Alright, so a couple of months ago I made this video where I compared the performance of the 9070 XT against the 5070 Ti in path tracing, and ever since then there's been a few driver updates on the, especially on the AMD side, that saw quite a big performance increase in some titles. Now, I did have a look at the 25.6.3 driver versus 25.3.1, which is the launch driver. I did have a look at its performance a few weeks ago, but I've had quite a few people asking me to retest the 9070 XT against the 5070 Ti, just when it comes to path tracing, both with the latest drivers. And that's exactly what we're doing today. So I've got 25.6.3 on the 9070 XT side. Then I've got 580.88, which is the driver that released a day or two ago for the GeForce GPU on the 5070 Ti side. And we'll just be testing a few path tracing games. So I've got 7 path tracing games here. My previous video only had 5. And additions are Doom the Dark Ages and then Black Myth Wukong. Obviously, Doom the Dark Ages was not available when I did my first video, but it's included in this one. Now, I did not retest all the settings from the previous video. I only tested one single setting for each game, but I've got performance upscaling, balance upscaling, quality upscaling, ray tracing high, ray tracing full, that kind of stuff. So there's a mix of everything. And then I just quickly want to talk about the GPUs that I'm using. The 5070 Ti is a Palit Gamerock model. It is factory locked at 1 volt, right? In game, I typically see around 980 millivolt to around 995 millivolt. No matter what BIOS update I do on there, VBIOS update, it's not going over 1 volt. And on the 9070 XT side, I've got a Gigabyte gaming OC, which has a power limit of 330 watt. Both GPUs are running fully stock now, undervolting, no power limit increases, and no overclocking on either the core or the memory. All right. And then the last thing I want to mention is just the taste system. I'm using a 7800 X3D with 32 gigabytes of DDR5, 6000 megatransfers per second CL30 memory, and that is on a B650 motherboard it's a Gigabyte Eagle. All right, let's get right to the benchmarks. All right, and starting off with Indiana Jones, Radeon on the left and GeForce on the right. Previously, the GeForce GPU was 100% faster using these exact same settings. Now, that gap has shrunk a little bit. I mean, the difference is really not that much, but we used to have 30 frames per second. Now we've got 34 frames per second. So a nice 10 to 15% increase there with those settings. And then just testing Giza as well. Once again, the Radeon GPU, it's got these constant black flashes, not sure why. But over here, when there's not a lot of foliage, the performance is actually, it's playable, right? 60 frames per second here with balanced upscaling. So pretty decent there. All right, and then if we have Doom the Dark Ages here, I just want to say that the metrics you see on screen have been captured from the start of the benchmark. I'm only including the last part of the benchmark visually, right? But here you can see that we're sitting with around 60 frames per second versus 90 frames per second, although we have to use performance upscaling here. Now, all these settings are pretty much the same as the previous video. Obviously, I didn't have Doom the Dark Ages, so I'm just saying that, seeing that I got a little bit of time here. The settings that I used here are identical to the settings I used in the previous video, so you can just reference that to see what kind of differences we are seeing. Now, once again, it's around 50% faster here for the GeForce GPU over the Radeon GPU, but still around 60 frames per second, not that terrible. Now, if we move over to Cyberpunk 2077, the Radeon GPU actually performs pretty well here. Once again, reverting to performance upscaling. But what you can do is you can use OptiScaler and inject FSR4. The game actually apparently supports FSR4. We're just waiting for an AMD driver so that we can activate FSR4 in the Adrenaline software. Until then, you are stuck with either FSR 2.1 or FSR 3, which does not look that good at 1440p on performance. But as I said, I'm just testing the same settings as I did in the previous video, just some of them, right? Not retesting everything. But you can just see that the image on the 5070 Ti looks a lot cleaner because this is with DLSS 4, right? The transformer model. And also we do have ray reconstruction enabled, so reflections look a lot better, and RT noise is also a lot better on the Radeon GPU, the GeForce GPU. The Radeon GPU though, performs quite okay here, 74 frames per second. And if you have to use FSR4, it'll probably drop to around 65 frames per second, but it'll look a lot better than it does currently. Alright, so then if we have a look at Black Myth Wukong, I also did not have Black Myth Wukong in my previous video, just because I find the performance to be very inconsistent. I don't know. So I reran these tests 3 times and they are consistent. So that's why I decided to include it in this video here. And also, because it is an Unreal Engine 5 title that supports path tracing, thought it was a unique game to throw into the mix here. And you can see that we're sitting with around 100 frames per second on the GeForce GPU and around 50 frames per second on the Radeon GPU. So the GeForce GPU is about twice as fast here. And this is without any frame generation, right? So on the GeForce GPU, you can go ahead and enable frame generation. You'll get around 150, 160 frames per second, which is actually pretty decent experience here. And on the Radeon side, it also supports FSR frame generation. So that would also almost double your frame rate, right? And you'll get around, I'd say around 90 to 95 FPS here. Now, if we move on to Half-Life RTX, last time people complained that I inserted RTX titles, but there's not a lot of path tracing games out there, right? Now, this game does not support FSR. You have to use TAAU, which looks terrible. And also we're getting around 50% higher frame rate on the GeForce GPU. Now moving on to Quake 2 RTX, we actually get a very decent experience here with the Radeon GPU. This game does not support DLSS, it actually only supports FSR, which is quite strange for an RTX title. But 90 frames per second here versus 133, which does translate to around a 50% increase over the Radeon GPU for the GeForce GPU, but definitely not a terrible experience at all using the Radeon GPU here. Now, lastly, we move on to Alan Wake 2, and the performance differences here is really not that big, right? We're sitting with 70 versus 60 frames per second, and it's, I don't know, it's kind of similar experience when it comes to the frame rate, but we also do have DLSS ray reconstruction in this game, which does make reflections look better. The RTD noiser is much better, and we don't even have to drop down to performance upscaling here. We've got quality upscaling, so FSR3 quality, and then DLSS 4 transformer model quality, right? So if we had to use the DLSS legacy mode, it would be a little bit higher. We'd be getting around 5 frames per second, 5 to 10 frames per second higher, depending on where we are, right? So, I mean, it's a decent showing here by the Radeon GPU. Though I will say that if you are interested in path tracing, GeForce GPUs are definitely the way to go, especially 40 and 50 series GPUs. 30 series GPUs still struggle a little bit, but with the help of DLSS 4 transformer model, you can use quite aggressive upscaling while the game still looks plenty good. Alright, that's going to be the end of this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and as always, we hope to see you in the next one.